"Hello, mister, Mama has a fever. Here's $1, could you help her?" The little voice cried out. In my world, $1 buys a life or ends one. But as the rain soaked through my Italian wool suit, a tiny, trembling hand held out a single, crumpled bill. "Mister," the girl whispered, her braids dripping with water, "Mama's skin is like a stove. Is $1 enough to make the fire go away?" I am Lee Tan, the man the city fears, and in that moment, for the first time in 20 years, I had no idea what to say. The rain in District 8 didn't wash things clean. It just turned the soot into a gray slurry that clung to the tires of Lee Tan's obsidian black sedan. Inside the car, the air smelled of expensive leather and old cedar wood. Lee Tan watched the rhythmic flick of the windshield wipers. To anyone else, the park across the street was a desolate patch of rusted swings. To him, it was a tactical vantage point. "The shipment is delayed, sir," his associate, Kenji, muttered from the front seat. "The locals are getting restless about the new development. They think we're here to evict them." Lee Tan didn't answer. He was watching a small flash of pink in the rearview mirror. A young girl, no older than 7, was sprinting through the downpour. Her hair, tied in intricate braids with pink beads that clacked together like rain on a tin roof, was soaked. She didn't look like she was playing. She looked like she was hunting for someone. "Sir, we should move. Security protocol," the man in the passenger seat warned. "Wait," Lee Tan said. His voice was a low vibration. The girl stopped right at his door. She didn't knock. She stood there, shivering, her eyes wide, staring at the tinted glass. Lee Tan lowered the window. "You're the man who owns the big buildings," she said. "I am. You should be inside, little one," Lee Tan replied. "I don't matter," she whispered. She pulled out a damp, crumpled piece of paper. It was a $1 bill. "Mister, Mama has a fever. It won't go away. The man at the store said medicine costs money. Is this enough?" Lee Tan looked at the bill. He looked at the girl, Jennifer. He saw the desperation in her eyes. $1, Lee Tan asked softly. "It's all I have," she said. "Please, I don't want her to go to the sky yet." "What is your mother's name?" Lee Tan asked. "Rashiel," Jennifer whispered. "We live in the building with the broken red sign." "Go back to her, Jennifer," Lee Tan said. "Tell her a friend is sending a cool breeze." "Is the $1 enough?" she asked. "It's more than enough," Lee Tan lied. "It's the most valuable currency I've handled all year." As the window rolled up, Lee Tan felt the weight of that single $1 against his chest. "Kenji," he said, "find the best doctor in the city. Tell them they are making a house call to the building with the broken red sign. Now." The building with the broken red sign was a monument to neglect. Lee Tan didn't send his men. He went himself, trailed only by a doctor he had summoned under heavy pressure. They climbed the stairs to apartment 4B. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the apartment was small but clean. In the bedroom, the air was thick with the heat of a body fighting itself. Rashiel lay on a bed, her skin slick with sweat. She was a woman of striking beauty, even through the gray pallor of her illness. Jennifer was sitting on a stool by the bed, pressing a wet washcloth to her mother's forehead. She looked up as Lee Tan entered. "You came," she breathed. "I brought the medicine," Lee Tan said. He gestured to the doctor. "Move, do your job." Lee Tan stood in the corner. He felt out of place. He was a man of shadows, and this room was full of desperate love. He watched the doctor work. "Severe pneumonia," the doctor whispered to Lee Tan. "She needs a hospital, Mr. Tan, tonight." "No hospitals," Lee Tan said. "My enemies are looking for any link to this neighborhood. You will bring the equipment here. Set up a private ward. Use the $1 I gave you for supplies." Jennifer walked over to Lee Tan and grabbed the hem of his black suit jacket. "Is she going to be okay, Mr. Boss?" Lee Tan looked down at her. "She is going to be fine, Jennifer. I've already paid the bill." But as he spoke, his phone vibrated. A text from his security team. "The syndicate knows you're at the apartment. They think you've gone soft. Ambush potential. High." Lee Tan stepped out of the building to find 4 black SUVs idling at the curb. A man named Vance, a rival within the organization, stepped out. "Lee," Vance said with a sneer, "word got around you were playing social worker in the slums. The board thinks you're losing your edge over a woman and a brat." Lee Tan adjusted his cufflinks. My business in this district is my own, Vance. Go home. Maybe we should go upstairs and see what's so special about them, Vance suggested, nodding toward his armed guards. In one fluid motion, Lee Tan was in Vance's space. He didn't pull a weapon. He didn't need to. The sheer aura of controlled violence radiating from him made the guards freeze. If you so much as look at the directory of this building, Lee Tan whispered, I will erase your name from every ledger in this city. You won't be dead. You'll be forgotten. Vance paled and backed away. It's just business, Lee. It became personal when she handed me $1, Lee Tan said. Now get out. As the SUVs sped away, Lee Tan looked up at the window of 4B inside. Rashiel stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, catching the silhouette of the man standing in the street below. She didn't know who he was, but for the first time in weeks, the crushing weight in her chest felt lighter. Jennifer sat by her side, holding her hand. The man with the $1 is watching, Mama. We're safe. Lee Tan stood there until the sun began to peek over the industrial skyline. He had a war to win and a mother to save. The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated risks. Under Lee Tan's strict orders, Apartment 4B was transformed into a high-tech medical suite disguised behind the peeling wallpaper of District 8. Oxygen tanks were smuggled in inside laundry crates, and heart monitors were silenced so the neighbors wouldn't hear the rhythmic beep of survival. Lee Tan didn't leave. He occupied the small wooden chair in the kitchen, his laptop open, managing a multi-million-dollar empire while the smell of Rashiel's jasmine-scented candles fought against the medicinal odor of the nebulizer. Jennifer became his silent shadow. She didn't ask questions about the men in suits standing guard at the stairwell, nor did she ask why the doctor looked terrified every time Lee Tan glanced at him. Instead, she brought him a lukewarm cup of water. You don't sleep, Mr. Lee, she asked, her voice small. Sleep is a luxury for people who aren't holding a $1 bill for safekeeping, Lee Tan replied, his eyes never leaving the monitor. Mama's hand is cooler today, Jennifer said, a tiny smile breaking through her exhaustion. The fire is going out. Lee Tan looked at the girl. Her resilience was a sharp contrast to the men he dealt with daily, men who crumbled at the first sign of a stock dip. She's a fighter, Jennifer, just like you. But the peace was a thin veil. On his screen, Lee Tan watched a series of encrypted messages. His bank accounts in Singapore were being flagged. The syndicate wasn't just watching, they were strangling his resources. They wanted to see if he would sacrifice his empire for the woman in the next room. Jennifer, Lee Tan said, closing his laptop, go sit with your mother. Tell her that no matter what noise she hears outside, she is not to open the door. Are the bad men coming? Lee Tan stood up, straightening his tie. No, I'm going to make sure they never even think about this street again. Lee Tan summoned a meeting of the syndicate's inner circle, not in a boardroom, but in a neutral, high-security warehouse near the docks. He knew that to save Rashiel and Jennifer, he couldn't just be a protector. He had to be a predator. 7 men sat around a steel table. Vance was there, looking smug, flanked by elders who had built the organization on blood and silence. You've been distracted, Lee, the eldest, a man named Hwan, said. A girl, a sick woman. You've stalled the redevelopment project for a single tenement building. The losses are projected at $12 million. Lee Tan tossed the crumpled $1 bill onto the center of the steel table. The men stared at it as if it were a bomb. That $1, Lee Tan began, his voice dangerously calm, is the only honest contract I've signed in 10 years. The redevelopment project isn't stalled because I'm soft. It's stalled because the developers were skimming from your shares. I spent my time in that slum tracing their paper trail. He threw a thick folder onto the table. It was a lie, mostly. He had spent his time caring for Rashiel, but he had used his sleepless nights to dig up dirt on everyone in the room as a fail-safe. Vance here was going to let them take 30% of your retirement fund, Lee Tan continued, eyes locking onto Vance, who began to sweat. I'm not protecting a building. I'm protecting the district because if the city sees us as heartless evictors, the federal task force moves in. I'm keeping you out of prison. You should be thanking that girl. The room went cold. Li Tan had flipped the narrative. He wasn't a man moved by pity, he was a man moved by strategy. And if anyone goes near that building, Li Tan added, leaning forward, they aren't just crossing me. They're destroying the only shield you have left against the law. While Li Tan played his deadly game of chess at the docks, the fire finally broke in apartment 4B. Rashiel opened her eyes, and for the first time in a week, the world wasn't a swirling fog of heat and pain. She saw the pale morning light filtering through the window. She felt the soft pressure of Jennifer's head resting on her hip, the girl having fallen asleep in the middle of a prayer. But she also saw the equipment, the IV drip in her arm, the expensive monitor, and then she saw the man standing in the doorway. He wasn't a doctor. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than her apartment building. He looked tired, his dark hair slightly disheveled, but his eyes were like flint. "Who are you?" Rashiel whispered, her voice a raspy ghost of itself. Li Tan stepped into the room. He didn't approach the bed, he kept a respectful distance. "A friend of Jennifer's, she hired me." Rashiel looked down at her sleeping daughter, then back at Li Tan. She saw the way he watched over them, not like a guard, but like a man standing over a treasure he didn't quite understand. "She hired you?" Rashiel asked, confused. Li Tan reached into his pocket and produced the dollar bill, now smoothed out but still worn. "She paid in advance. She said you had a fever." Rashiel's breath hitched. She knew how little they had. She knew what it meant for Jennifer to seek out a stranger. She looked at Li Tan's face, the hardness of his jaw, the depth of his gaze, and she didn't see a mafia boss. She saw the man who had stood in the rain so her daughter wouldn't have to. "You saved us," Rashiel said, tears welling in her eyes. "No," Li Tan said, looking at the dollar bill one last time before placing it on the nightstand. "Your daughter saved me. I was just the muscle." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. Kenji burst in, his face pale. "Sir, we have a problem. Vance didn't take the deal. He's outside with a crew. He's not coming for the money, he's coming for the weakness." Li Tan's face transformed instantly back into a mask of stone. He looked at Rashiel, then at the terrified Jennifer who had just woken up. "Stay under the bed," Li Tan commanded. "Don't come out until I say the word dollar." The hallway of the tenement felt like a pressurized chamber. Li Tan stood alone in the dim light of the flickering fluorescent bulbs, the door to 4B locked behind him. He heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots on the stairs, Vance's men, desperate to prove that Li Tan had lost his grip. Vance appeared at the end of the corridor, flanked by 4 men holding heavy iron pipes and suppressed sidearms. "You should have stayed in the boardroom, Li," Vance sneered. "Building a nursery in a war zone, that's not business. That's a funeral." Li Tan didn't reach for a weapon. He simply stood with his hands behind his back, a shadow against the peeling paint. "I told you, Vance, this isn't about business anymore. This is about the $1 contract, and I never break a contract." As the men rushed forward, Li Tan moved with the terrifying precision of a man who had spent his youth in the pits of underground rings. He didn't use lethal force. That would bring the police to Rashiel's doorstep. Instead, he used the architecture of the building against them. He swung a loose metal handrail, parrying a pipe and sending a man crashing into the drywall. He moved like smoke, his movements a blur of black silk and focused intent. Inside the room, Rashiel held Jennifer tight. They heard the muffled sounds of the struggle, the grunts, the heavy falls, the metallic clatter. Jennifer buried her face in her mother's chest. "He's fighting the monsters, Mama," she whispered. Rashiel, though weak, felt a surge of protective instinct. She looked at the heavy oak dresser. She might not have been a warrior, but she wasn't going to let Li Tan fight alone. Outside, Li Tan stood over a gasping Vance. He hadn't broken a bone, but he had shattered Vance's pride. He leaned down, grabbing the man by his expensive collar. "Go back to the board. Tell them the district belongs to the people who live here now. If a single brick of this building is touched, I will liquidate every asset you have ever loved." Vance scrambled away, his men dragging him toward the exit. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. The aftermath of the skirmish brought a strange, new reality to District 8. Li Tan didn't go back to his high-rise penthouse. He stayed in a nearby apartment he'd purchased overnight, transforming it into a command center. He used his vast resources to do something the syndicate found baffling. He started fixing things. He didn't just pay for Rashiel's medicine, he bought the entire building. He hired local contractors to fix the elevator, the heating, and the broken red sign. One evening, a week after her recovery, Rashiel knocked on the door of his temporary office. She was wearing a simple yellow dress, her strength returned, her eyes clear and searching. "Why are you doing this, Lee?" she asked, standing amidst the blueprints of a new community clinic. "You're a man of secrets. You could have just given us the money and disappeared." Lee Tan looked up from his desk. He saw Rashiel, not as a victim, but as a woman of immense dignity who had raised a child like Jennifer in the heart of a storm. "I've spent 20 years building walls," Lee Tan said quietly. "I thought power was the ability to control people through fear. But Jennifer, she showed me a different kind of power. She walked up to the most dangerous man in the city and offered him $1 because she believed in the goodness of a stranger." He stood up and walked toward her. "I'm not a good man, Rashiel, but for the first time, I want to be the man she thinks I am." Rashiel reached out, her hand tentatively touching his arm. The gap between their worlds, the Korean underworld and the African-American community of District 8, seemed to shrink in the warmth of that small room. "You don't have to be a good man for the whole world," she whispered. "You just have to be here." 2 years later, the broken red sign building was gone, replaced by the Zuri Rashiel Community Center. It was a beacon of light in District 8, providing free healthcare and after-school programs. Lee Tan was no longer the ghost boss. He had stepped down from the syndicate, using his exit as a leverage to transition the organization into legitimate logistics and real estate. He was now a man of the sun, though the shadow of his past ensured that no one dared trouble his new territory. On a bright Saturday afternoon, the playground was full of children. Jennifer, now 9, was leading a group of kids in a game of tag, her braids flying behind her, decorated with new beads, green and gold. Rashiel stood by the entrance, watching the scene with a smile. She felt a hand on her waist. Lee Tan stood beside her, dressed not in a suit, but in a simple dark sweater. He looked younger, the hard lines of his face softened by peace. "The doctor says the clinic is at full capacity," Rashiel said, leaning into him. "We're going to need more space." Lee Tan smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "I've already bought the lot next door. It's handled." Jennifer ran up to them, breathless and grinning. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, shiny coin. "Look, I found this under the slide. Can I buy Mama an ice cream?" Lee Tan knelt down, taking the coin and looking at it with the same reverence he had once shown the crumpled dollar. He looked at Rashiel, then back at the girl who had changed the trajectory of his soul. "I think we can do better than that," Lee Tan said, picking Jennifer up and setting her on his shoulder. "I think we should celebrate, together." As the three of them walked toward the ice cream truck, the sun setting over a transformed District 8, the story didn't end with a battle or a bank account. It ended with a family, born of a fever, a desperate plea, and the extraordinary weight of a single dollar. The end. If you love this story, hit the subscribe button to subscribe, and also stay tuned for more.